Joining us this morning to explain how these proposals would impact nearly 1 million students right here in the city is Julian Shen-Berro with Chalkbeat, which focuses on education issues. So good morning, Julian. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's make sense of these numbers. The governor's total is more than $35 billion. So how much of that actually comes to New York City?
Right. So that number you're referencing, that's Governor Hochul's proposed education budget. According to figures that the state has released, New York City schools would receive about $13.3 billion from that, which is roughly 2.5% more than we received this fiscal year. So that's that $341 million increase. Typically state funding accounts for a little more than a third of the city's overall education budget. So it's, a significant amount of money, both in terms of that dollar amount, but also, the portion of the education budget, particularly when the city's education budget, has faced some cuts at the city level.
Yeah, Julian, what factors into how the state determines which school districts get how much, right? New York City versus, say, Long Island or whatever it may be. Now, I know Long Island school districts may be smaller, but what's the determining factors?
Yeah, so the state uses something called the foundation aid formula to calculate how much money goes out to different school districts. And that's a pretty complicated formula that's based on a lot of different factors. But broadly speaking, it aims to send more money to districts that serve more students with particularly high needs. And it accounts for other changing factors as well, like inflation. So when we talk about Governor Hochul's proposal to increase education funding by $825 million, the bulk of that is coming through, a $500 million roughly increase to foundation aid, and that's largely being driven by inflation. So one of the more controversial elements of her proposal is that that formula would change a little bit, if her budget as proposed passes, and so even though the overall budget is going up, it's actually rising by a smaller figure than was previously anticipated, and that sparks some concerns about whether there will be sufficient funding going out to schools.
Yeah, and so once they allocate that funding, it's a matter of how they're going to spend that money, right? So Governor Hochul wants to focus on literacy and phonics, which is similar to what New York City Schools Chancellor David Banks has been doing since taking office. So take a look at these programs then. Did they pay off for New York City public schools?
Right. So, it's a little bit difficult to say. So, just to recap, Governor Hochul's literacy initiative, like you're mentioning, very similar to what's happening in the city and what Chancellor Banks has done. This goal of moving away from the, so-called balanced literacy that's, kind of focused on getting kids excited about reading, giving them a lot of independent reading time, and hoping that they kind of practice that on their own. Which experts have said it doesn't always work for students who struggle to read, including those with learning disabilities like dyslexia. And so there's this move towards phonics, towards lessons that are explicitly teaching that relationship between sounds and letters. In the city, we've seen data from recent state exams showing, only about half of the city's 3rd through 8th graders are scoring proficient in reading. And for Black and Latino students, it's an even lower rate of about 40% who are scoring proficient. So there's definitely a sense of urgency around this issue, but it can be difficult to talk about impact now, in part because the city is still phasing in that literacy effort, but also because the state learning standards were changed last year, so the exams were changed as well, and so it can be difficult to make backwards comparisons to kind of prior years. So it's something we're still kind of waiting to see how everything pans out on.
Yeah, okay. And, Julian, the governor is expected to get some pushback now on this proposed extension of mayoral control from state education officials. I feel like we kind of go through this every 2 to 4 years, right, with this whole topic of mayoral control. Why is it such a thing? Why is it so contentious for so many?
Right. That's a great question. Mayoral control has been a polarizing issue for quite some time. And, there are certainly critics in the state legislature, among parent advocates, among educators who feel that centralizing power over the school system in the hands of the mayor hasn't been, the most effective means of school governance, who feel that, there's been a lack of a community voice in decision making, as well as a lack of, checks and balances on the mayor's power over schools. At the same time, though, you have supporters of the system who think it's more effective and more accountable than this sort of fractured school board approach that we had before. So, I think it's in that way it kind of garners a lot of passion on both sides of this debate. But it's something that, there are certainly, we're also kind of waiting to see how this plays out in Albany as negotiations continue with the budget and negotiations continue over mayoral control as well.
All All right, Julian Shen, thanks so much for being with us this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.